the resident patient, why should anyone murder a man in so clumsy a fashion as by hanging him? Well, see, that gives us something to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, clumsiness is a clue.
Shall we make a clumsy attempt at this?
Oh, good idea.
It never fails at the landscaping crews out in the neighborhood. Okay, here we go.
This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the circle was red, the study was scarlet, and the Scot was glorious, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about the giant rat of Sumatra, the remarkable worm unknown to science, or the repulsive story of the red leech?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 397, Clumsiness. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, here I am, clumsily introducing you for this episode.
No, it's not clumsy at all. You're going to need to do worse than that. I'm right here.
You are so elegant in all of your refinery there.
Yeah, right.
Refinery and refinery.
Yes, I have my dress sneakers on. You can tell.
I heard the Velcro. Well, this is going to be an interesting episode. This is one of those topics that was suggested to us by a listener, Ron Greenwood. We thank you for suggesting clumsiness in the canon. We will have a little thank you gift headed your way, which is what we do. If you would like to be like Ron and you've identified something in the Sherlock Holmes stories that you're thinking about or wondering about, or that you think we should think or wonder about and talk about, then let us know. Just send us an email at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com and let us know that you'd like to discuss it. And if we do use your idea on the air, we will send you a thank you gift from the Trifles vaults. And of course, we do encourage people to support the show in any way they would like. We have options on Substack and Patreon. The links are there in the show notes. Check us out and support us at a level that makes sense for you. Okay, well, we promised to venture into clumsy land. There are mentions of the word clumsy, clumsily, clumsiness, and there are instances where the word itself is not mentioned that are, by the very virtue of the way they're constructed, events or happenings or interactions that are inherently clumsy. So, Burt, why don't we kick this off right at the beginning of the canon?
That is a great idea. And, just to orient our listeners here, the idea here is not to find, the appearance of certain words in the Sherlock Holmes stories. The idea is, what are these themes? What are these insights, these observations in the cases of Sherlock Holmes tell us about characters or about people or circumstance, and what the choices were? Why does that particular concept appear at a particular time? And interestingly enough, to your point, it appears right in the start of the cases of Sherlock Holmes when Watson first meets Holmes, and he is at St. Bart's in the laboratory, excited about the discovery of his new Sherlock Holmes test for blood. He says, he says, Watson observes, well, it seems to be a very delicate test. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. The old guaiacum test was very clumsy and uncertain. And here is Holmes, the innovator, who is using his explorations, his chemical knowledge and so on, and as a way to make things more precise. And, that drive for precision and accuracy and observation is so characteristic of Holmes right from this almost first sentence.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful introduction to the personality of Sherlock Holmes, this man who is interested in precision, is fed up with the old ways, very critical of mere mortals that may stand in his way. And it's reinforced a couple of chapters later, maybe one chapter later, as they're looking at the racha that's been scribbled on the wall above the body of Enoch Drebber, they find. And he said the A, if you noticed, was printed somewhat after the German fashion. Now, a real German invariably prints in the Latin character, so that we may safely say that this was not written by one, that is, by one German, but by a clumsy imitator who overdid his part. So it seems like there's almost a disdain that Holmes brings with his expertise that kind of flows over into his analysis here.
I just realized after all the years of reading the Sherlock Holmes stories that I have no idea what it means to print after the German fashion, the letter A. I don't know what that... Unless there was an umlaut over it, I have no idea what that means.
Well, maybe that's a trifling topic for another show.
Yeah. Well, and then we have the sign of 4, where we've got this observation that Watson makes about Toby, about how Toby walks. And it's a lovely little descriptor, this ugly, long-haired, lop-eared creature, half spaniel, half lurcher, brown and white in color with a very clumsy, waddling gait. It really does give you a picture of poor old Toby. And then, interestingly enough, the idea of clumsiness as a clue pops up in A Scandal in Bohemia in chapter 1, and of that particular case, which didn't really have chapters, but we have Watson has not seen Holmes in some time because he's been married since Sign of 4. Wedlock suits you, he's put on some weight. And it's how Holmes has deduced that Watson is back in active practice. How do I know? I see it. I deduce it. How do I know you've been getting yourself very wet lately? And that you have a most clumsy and careless servant girl. And then, he says, well, this delights Holmes because he's clearly stumped Watson. And he says, well, my eyes tell me that on the inside of your left shoe, just where the firelight strikes it, the leather is scored. So Holmes can make all of these deductions.
Yeah, she clearly had no experience in, cobblery or shoe repair and cleaning. And
careless scraping.
And this is kind of off script a little bit, but that reminds me of another clumsy servant, and that is the wheezy breezy Susan in The Three Gables, who is lurking outside the door, trying to eavesdrop on Holmes's conversation regarding the problem presented by Mrs. Maberly. And Holmes, just kind of whips the door open, and Susan stumbles in. And, he reminds her that an asthmatic shouldn't be someone who is trying to eavesdrop because it's Obviously, it's a self-giveaway there. Very clumsy in her efforts to convey information back to Isadora Klein.
Poor Susan. She should not have been in a dusty environment in the first place. Well, and then clumsiness pops up as another clue, of course, in the resident patient. Because what we have is this strange experience. The resident patient himself seems to have hung himself. And Holmes, is very aware of all of the inconsistencies in the room. The cigar ends, the different kinds, how they've been smoked. But he also asks, why should anyone... the inspector actually questions the very idea that it could be murder, which Holmes has assured him it is, very deeply planned and cold-blooded murder. And the inspector says, why should anyone murder a man in so clumsy a fashion as by hanging him? Well, that's what we have to find out. So he's not fooled. Holmes is not fooled by this.
He's not fooled. And why do you suppose... hanging would be considered clumsy? Just the awkwardness of arranging the victim?
Well, if you want to hang somebody, you've got to convince them to put their head in a noose, and that really is. Really. Dave, I'd like to buy you an ascot, but I'm not sure of your size. I happen to have this rope here.
It's only slightly used.
I don't want an ascot. Yes, you do. Now put your head in here. No bother. Oh, don't be a baby. It's very clumsy.
Which actually is appropriate because the next quote comes from the Naval Treaty. Holmes comes home after being out all night, stalking out Joseph Harrison, and he's got his hand bandaged. And Watson says, "You're not wounded, Holmes." And Holmes said, "'Tis but a scratch." "Tut, tut, it is only a scratch through my own clumsiness. This case of yours, Mr. Phelps, is certainly one of the darkest I've ever investigated." So he makes light of a fairly serious injury that he got with some sword play or knife play with Joseph Harrison there. "Your arm's off. 'Tis but a scratch."
Don't be a baby. Well, also in Hound of the Baskervilles, Holmes speaks of himself deprecatingly, which is unusual. But we have this scene where, they followed Sir Henry down Regent Street, and they've been observed by the man wearing a beard in the cab. And Holmes feels that he's been perhaps... less efficient and effective as he could be. And Watson observes, "Oh, what a shame that we didn't get the number," and Holmes of the cab. And "Clumsy as I've been, you surely do not seriously imagine I neglected to get the number." He at least did that. But it's unusual for Holmes to be, self-deprecating like that.
Yeah, it is. And that, too, brings to mind an instance where Holmes seems to have been clumsy, but was actually feigning it for dramatic effect. And that is from the Reigate Squires. Of course, he's recuperating at the home of Colonel Hayter there. He's overdone himself and he's in exhaustion. So it isn't terribly surprising that when he enters a room, he kind of stumbles over and knocks over a table with some oranges on it. But we later find out that this was a ruse so that he could, I guess, distract the Cunninghams and retrieve that piece of paper that was in the hand of one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, interestingly enough, in the red circle, particularly for those of us who are fond of cursive handwriting and who lament its absence from today's educational curricula, there's this scene in the red circle where Holmes is just very curious about these little notes that the landlady has provided to him. This is certainly a little unusual, he says. Seclusion I can understand, but why print? Printing is a clumsy process. Why not write? See, now that should be the motto of the American Cursive Society, if there is an American Cursive Society. There should be.
I like that.
There should be.
Why
ACS.
not write?
Yeah. Printing is a clumsy process. Why not write, Sherlock Holmes?
I like that. Well, and I think probably one to kind of settle on here is in the Valley of Fear. Holmes and Watson